Hello viewers, welcome to all of you. Today we are here going to come up with a new topic that's called as The Postmaster by Rabindranath Tagore. This is a beautiful, touching short story. This reminds us that Tagore has given short story as a gift to the Indian culture. This story is with two major characters, Ratan and Dada Babu, and it brings out the aspect of companionship, dependency and the beautiful relationship that we get to see between Ratan and Dada Babu. Now let us take a look at this lesson. To begin about the short story. Edgar Allan Poe has defined short story as a prose narrative requiring anything from half an hour to 1 or 2 hours in its perusal. A story that concentrates on a unique or single effect and one in which the totality of effect is the main objective in the end form has shown itself to be so flexible and susceptible of so much variety that its possibilities seem almost endless. As literary forms go, the short story as a genre is very young. Until the middle class mass literacy of the 19th century arrived in the West and the magazine market was invented to service the new reading public preferences, there had been no real short fiction in the 5 to 50 page range. However, short narratives and tales had existed for centuries in one form or another. Brief narratives like anecdotes, short allegorical romances, fairy tales, myths, fables, historical legends, Boccaccio's Decameron and Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. These are all examples of short prose narratives. But the honor of the first literary short story goes to Walter Scott's story, The Two Drovers. Scott's influence, huge in its day, not only inspired George Eliot and Thomas Hardy at home, but also Balzac in France, Pushkin and Turgenev in Russia, and Hawthorne in America. In the first half of the 20th century, the appeal of the short story continued to grow. Literally hundreds of writers published thousands of excellent stories. Innovative and commanding writers emerged in countries that had previously exerted little influence on the genre. Sicily produced Luigi Pirandello, Czechoslovakia produced Franz Kafka, Argentina produced George Louis Borges. Bengal seems to have mastered the modern art of short story earlier than other Indian linguistic communities. Tagore is widely regarded as the inventor of modern Bengali short story and is credited with introducing colloquial speech into Bengali literature. He has been compared to such masters of the short story form such as Chekhov, Tolstoy and Maupassant. Tagore's short fiction is often set in rural Bengali villages and is peopled by characters from the underprivileged sectors of society, reflecting Tagore's commitment to social realism in prose. Many of Tagore's short stories also include elements of the supernatural and bizarre. The short story is Rabindranath Tagore's gift to Indian culture. Tagore wrote 200 short stories, of which many have become available in English after he attained international acclaim as the Nobel Prize winning poet of Gitanjali. Early reviewers in English received Tagore's stories with applause for Tagore's ability to blend poetic lyricism with social realism. His stories almost always tell the tale of rural or semi-urban Bengal of his time, starting abruptly, developing around a trivial and ordinary incident or situation, and ending with a twist when the reader's curiosity about the story is almost acute. Thus, he deviated from the traditional way of linear storytelling. What Tagore did in his short stories was to record only certain moments in the lives of common people and not life in its totality or completeness. Thus, Tagore's stories are deliberately fashioned works of art, completely original creations and not influenced by any Western writers. The stories communicate realism mixed with romanticism and insights into the human mind. There is a total absence of excessive passion and exaggerated situations. What makes these stories remarkable is the author's multi-dimensional vision of life, which is discernible in the way he telescopes man's relationship with his social milieu. Capable of boundless love for human beings, Tagore emerges as a singer of the weal and woe of common life. As a short story writer, Tagore was a practitioner of psychological and spiritual realism. A critic, while making an assessment of Tagore, remarked that his short stories are essentially lyrical in temperament. His rich visual imagery and emotional colors reflect a profound sense of humanity that evokes the essence of rural Bengal. Very often, in his short stories, Tagore focuses on the struggle of women in traditional Bengali society mired in superstitions and prohibitions. The Postmaster, which is counted among Tagore's finest short stories, is by itself hopelessly uninteresting, but it acquires immense interest on account of the passage of lyrical grandeur, giving expression to the feelings of the orphan girl Ratan. The snobbery of the middle class was clearly pictured in the refusal of the Postmaster to recognize Ratan as a human being and give her the shelter she yearned for. Throughout the story, Tagore's main interest is Ratan and Dada Babu and the kaleidoscope of their emotions and the hypocrisies, restrictions and the prohibitions of contemporary Bengali society. Postmaster is a touching story of a city-bred young man working in a newly opened post office in a remote village to earn his bread and butter. He lives here more out of companionship rather than a choice. In the small village of Ulapur, an English man who owns an indigo factory near it manages to get a post office established. A postmaster from Calcutta, now Kolkata, separated from his family and transferred to this village. From the noise of the city, he comes to a deserted village with just scattered glimpses of people. Tagore's finely crafted poetic narration brings out the haunting homesickness of the educated young man at a place where he finds no suitable companionship, as well as the mellow, natural greenery and serenity that encompasses him. Tagore, a lover of nature, used it to describe the surroundings. The postmaster's office has a green, slimy pond surrounded by dense vegetation. The way he describes this shows that the postmaster is not in a position to appreciate his closeness to nature. On the other hand, the despair and agony of Ratan, the orphan, the young orphan girl who foolishly identified her kind master as her elder brother, as he took a personal interest in her, has also been worded very artistically in this moving story. The postmaster did this partly to pass his long leisure, which hung heavy memories of his near and dear ones who were in Kolkata. When the moment of parting finally came, and when the postmaster, having felt a bit of compassion for the servant girl, offered her recommendations and money, Ratan was rendered heartbroken. Having believed that she was going to find genuine love and a home, sooner or later the offer of money burned the very core of her being. Bursting into tears, she ran away, refusing all help. The postmaster, despite his feelings for Ratan, realized that no lasting relationship was possible between them. The social hierarchy would never allow a person from the social strata to which Ratan belonged to be included in a caste Hindu family of the postmaster. Finally, as his boat begins sailing swiftly and the village of Ulapur recedes further in the distance, he tries to find comfort in the thought that there are so many separations and deaths in the world. However, Ratan stands outside the office with tears streaming from her eyes. She has been separated from her only bond and now longs it to return. Tagore ends by saying that humans often fall into hope rather than being guided by reason, and long before we realize, disappointment becomes too difficult to handle. The postmaster tells us that in spite of knowing for certain that she would lose something and will never get it back, Ratan succumbs to false hope with both hands and tries to convince herself that she will somehow get it. What are the different themes that we come across? It could be themes of companionship, it could be themes of dependency, separation, longing. Let us discuss a little about this. Firstly, to begin, the story revolves around longing and separation. The postmaster is taken away from his family and brought to a remote village. He was in a village where its busy people were no company, and he was left with not much work to do. He tries to calm his homesickness by writing poetry. However, the fact that he tries to write about something external to him, like nature, it makes it an impossible venture. The postmaster can't stand the quietude of Ulapur. He longs for the noises of the traffic and life in Kolkata. An orphan girl of the village, Ratan, helps him with his daily chores. He speaks to her about his mother and sister in the evenings and would keep inquiring about her family. He would speak to her with sadness of all those memories which were always haunting him. Secondly, the theme of companionship can be seen through how the relationship between the postmaster and Ratan grows through the course of this story. Ratan did not have many memories of her family to be recalled. There were only fragments like pictures of her father coming in the evening and her little brother whom she played with fishing on the edge of the pond. Once she met the postmaster, she spent her days with him doing all the small chores. Dada would share her meals with her. Then, in the evenings, she would listen to him talking about his relatives and, in her imagination, make them her own. Tagore translates the longing ringing in Dada's heart to nature, and when he says, "A persistent bird repeated all the afternoon the burden of its one complaint in nature's audience chamber. A man who initially failed in his attempt at verse thinks of this as of a loving human being he could hold close to his heart. One evening, he tells Ratan that he is going to teach her to read. She grows closer to him. She sees him as her only relative. She grows dependent. And this brings us to the theme of dependency. This dependency is the third theme explored in this story. As the season's rain seemed like it would never end, like the constant patter on the roof, Dada was troubled by his heart's exile. He falls sick in his solitude, and it is now Ratan who takes care of him, and he recovers just taking her presence for granted. But he then decides that he has to leave this village. He writes an application of transfer which is rejected. He tells Ratan that he has resigned and will be leaving the village. She asks him to take her with him. He thinks of it as an absurd idea, and she is haunted by his reaction. He consoles Ratan, saying that he would inform the postmaster about her. He even offers her some money. She refuses both and says that she does not want to stay there anymore. Ratan has lived a life of loneliness. Dada was her only companion and the only one who seemed to understand her. She is broken when he has to leave without her. She knew that he would never come back again, but still she waited there for him to return. Lastly, the treatment of women and their position in society was of serious concern to Tagore. Ratan shows a rare quality of courage, piety, obedience, love, and devotion, although in the end she realizes how displaced her qualities were. She will never find a place in a family of the postmaster because of the lowliness of her position in the caste and class hierarchy of their society. Women like Ratan were commonplace in Tagore's world. They were exploited by the patriarchal society. Being a sensitive man and the romantic poet of Bengal, Tagore understood women in all their joy and sorrow, in their hope and despair, in their yearnings and their dreams. Tagore found in the women of his society an immense wealth, their courage against all odds, their power of survival under the worst possible conditions, their forbearance, their self-sacrifice and gentleness. It pained him to see such colossal waste of so much human treasure. Indian women's rare quality of courage, piety, obedience, love, and devotion are the themes of many of Tagore's stories. Tagore had the unique natural genius to read women's minds, and he analyzed their strange structure through his stories. He tells the world that women are by nature sacrificing, loving, obedient, meek, religious, and kind. They adore their husbands, love their children, and deeply give due reverence to their in-laws and consideration to everyone whose lives they touch. Women in Tagore's days were exploited by the feudal society. The tradition-bound, cruel customs enhanced the miseries of women. Through his stories, Tagore pointed out these injustices. Tagore was never influenced by patriarchal views. That is why he depicted his heroines as more powerful and brighter than the spineless men. Tagore has explored the keen practical sense and determination of women in his stories, which confirms the fact that he believed in the progress of women and in their emancipation from social bondage. He also believed that given equal rights and opportunities, they might occupy their rightful place in the society side by side with men. Taking these views into consideration, one can call Tagore as a feminist writer. When one analyzes Tagore's stories, one will find two kinds of men in Bengali society who played central roles in the stories. The first category consists of those wealthy men who wanted to preserve feudal customs for their personal gains. The second category did not involve directly in the exploitation of women, but their passive attitude did not lessen the burden of Bengali women. Dada Babu belonged to this second category. Like many other heroes of Tagore's stories, failed to perform his duties and responsibilities as a surrogate brother to a young orphan girl whom he has in a way exploited. The two words Ratan and Dada Babu will definitely make us know or get to know a little about these two major characters of this short story. Tagore delved deep into the human heart and explored human emotions through the portrayal of his literary characters. One of them is Ratan in the story The Postmaster. The character of Ratan in the story is of a teenage orphan in a touching picture of lonely heart in the literary album created by the writer. Ratan is one of the simplest and yet one of the most enigmatic feminine characters in Rabindranath Tagore's short stories. She is a village girl, simple, honest and caring. She is illiterate at the beginning of the story, but slowly learns to read and write under the guidance of the postmaster. She does odd jobs for him and is very well behaved and obedient to her master. She is an orphan and suffers from deep-rooted agony of absolute solitude. Thus, in the postmaster's acts of education and storytelling about his own family back in Kolkata, she glimpses about a loving company of familial relations. Her need for love and to be loved is accentuated, and the way she starts to refer to the postmaster as Dada, which is a sign of growing intimacy. The most interesting feature of Ratan unfolds when she maternally looks after the ailing postmaster and at the end of the story, when he goes away permanently, initially she wants to go with him. But when he tells her it is simply not possible, she never utters another word. This is the pinnacle of her silent maturity. The mystery of her distinctly feminine desire and her extreme simplicity in not being able to understand the unbridgeable gaps between the urban and the rural, and thus the absurdity of her going away with him. Though Ratan is a young girl, her character looms large throughout the story like that of a caring mother. It is evident from her careful and prompt service to the postmaster. She is always at her Dada Babu's beck and call. She helps him cook meals, gets the water ready for his bath, and nurses him when he falls ill. Ratan gets a little food in return for her selfless service to him. However, the postmaster's presence in her lonely world is more important to her than what she gets in exchange for her service. When Ratan hears about the postmaster's plan to leave for Calcutta, now Kolkata, she makes an unusual request. Failing to appreciate the depth of her longing for the family, The postmaster laughs at her request to be taken home with him. He offers her some money instead. Having believed that she was going to find genuine love and a home sooner or later, the offer of money burned the very core of Ratan's being. Bursting into tears, she ran away, refusing all the help. She is left behind as lonely as she was before. In the end, she was left standing outside the office with tears streaming from her eyes. She has succumbed to a common human folly, as Tagore expresses, of hope. Ratan's character throws light on the folly of the human mind to survive, depending emotionally on the things which do not remain forever. Her character is a study on how a lonely heart developed this feeling of extremely emotional attachment and dependence to the point of giving a man blind commitment for friendship and love. This is how Tagore points out the outdated, cruel, feudal customs enhanced the miseries and tortures of women. We move now to the next segment of the lesson, where we need to know a little about the character of Dada Babu. The postmaster centers around a young postmaster referred to as Dada Babu by the young girl Ratan. Dada Babu has been transferred from Kolkata to a small Indian village, Ulapur, for a position as postmaster. He finds himself feeling very lonely and unable to relate to the factory workers around him. The postmaster is taken away from his family and brought to a remote village. He was in a village where its busy people were no company, and he was left with not much work to do. He tries to pacify his longing emotions by writing poetry. However, the fact that he tries to write about something external to him, like nature, makes it an impossible venture. Conversation and companionship comes to Dada Babu in the form of a young servant girl named Ratan. In an attempt to appease his loneliness, Dada Babu tells the girl stories about his distant family and even begins teaching her to read. Ratan quickly becomes attached to Dada Babu and develops strong, seemingly romantic feelings for him. When Dada Babu unexpectedly falls ill, Ratan does not leave his bedside. However, Dada Babu does not view Ratan in the same way. As soon as he recovers from sickness, Dada Babu requests a transfer out of Ulapur. The Bengali intelligentsia of Tagore's time was spineless men. Ratan asked him to take her home with him to the mother and sisters he has so often described for her as a palliative for his own homesickness. He laughs off her request, and it strikes him as so absurd that he sees no point in explaining his refusal. She had served the purpose in his life, and now that his urban mind was homeward bound, he had little need for rustic and low-born Ratan. With only a passing thought of Ratan's grief, Dada Babu boards a ship and is quickly engrossed in the thoughts of business. It was not that the postmaster did not feel occasional pangs of sorrow when he was leaving the village without taking Ratan with him. As his boat departs, he has one more vague impulse. He will go back for Ratan. But the boat is caught up by the current. As it passes the cremation ground, he soothes his conscience with platitudes about life's many partings, regardless of the helplessness of the misery of the orphan girl, for whom he was neither responsible nor accountable to the society or the world. He told himself that human bondage was after all a frail thing which was often broken by the hard realities of life. Hope you enjoyed this beautiful, touching short story. Thank you very much. We'll meet you in the next class. Thank you.